I would like to start by giving a little bit of a trigger warning, content warning. Some of these games are very difficult to watch. There is adult content, violence, things like that, but I will be keeping the gameplay light. I'm not going to go into some of the worst parts of it. I would also like to say that I am a neurodivergent video game nerd who has found most, if not all, of my favorite historical facts somewhere in a video game. And I've used video games as teaching tools for elementary school students across a wide variety of topics. This is not a tool just limited to children, though, right? Adults can and do benefit from playing games of all kinds. Families everywhere have board game nights that involve games like Risk or other battle strategy games based in real historical events. Even games like Fallout present alternative outcome stories that rely on true historical events to build their world. Now, when you think about educational games either around World War I or World War II, with other, I don't know, major historical events, what do you picture, right? Does it look anything like this, right? Believe it or not, this game is actually one that was founded on the ideas, or based rather, on the real ideology that Hitler endorsed during the rise of the Third Reich. But it's not exactly realistic, is it, right? So if you had somebody that, say, couldn't form mental images, and we'll come back to that, this is not the game that you would give them to show them kind of like the magnificence of Nazi architecture, for instance, right? Thankfully, in 2015, the game developers for this game gave us this.
Guten Morgen, Herr Jäger.
Was gibt's, Greta?
Die Papiere bitte.
Augenblick, warten Sie. Aus Frankfurt. Sind Sie Frankfurter?
Ja, ein Hotdog.
So ein komischer Kauz. Die spinnen die Amis. Hotdog. Die werden sich wundern, wenn wir an der Macht sind. Weiter. Greta, bei Fuß.
Now, both of these games are in the Wolfenstein franchise. The first game came out all the way back in 1981 and was shot from above. And in 1992, they released the remastered version that you just saw. And that was released in 1992. This one is Wolfenstein: The Old Blood. So look how beautiful that is. And think about how people who maybe can't normally imagine these sceneries would be able to actually see them when you play something like this.
I had the misfortune of encountering...
So, if this is a historical game, why are we seeing mechanical armor and zombies? Well, these games were developed based on the mythos surrounding the supposed obsession the Nazis had with the occult. While the belief in objects with supernatural power was not the main theme of Nazi propaganda, it was alluded to quite frequently, right? So game developers with an interest in alternative historical outcomes took this information and just ran with it. But what I want to focus on is the fact that these games, among others, are actually a really good way to show the idea of contingency in historical thinking, right? And to teach this concept. So let's divine it. We know from reading about the 3 C's of history that contingency is the idea that every historical event, the outcome of that event occurred because of a very specific set of conditions being met, right? So think about what actually happened in World War II. The Allies won, And how did that happen? Well, the rest of the world got involved, right? They came in and assisted. That's why it was called a world war. But the United States, for instance, or Britain, or any place like that, they're not going to win that war all on their own, right? They did need help. And so the conditions were correct for the Allied forces to win. But the idea of this game is, what if, right? Like, that's kind of the whole thing, okay? So kids may have historical play acting, but how do you get them to really understand, or anybody really, the idea of what this might look like, or have it done in a way that they can understand how even one single person can change history, right? So this is Outlast. This game is disturbingly graphic, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on any of the main gameplay because I don't want to get kicked out of this class. But the basic story is that you're a reporter that has received this email from a whistleblower within Mount Massive Asylum, which is run by this nefarious Murkoff Corporation. And as you find out later in the games, relied heavily on Operation Paperclip for its research into manipulating the human mind, right? Well, what's Operation Paperclip? Operation Paperclip was a U.S. intelligence program that brought well over 1,500 Nazi scientists to the United States after World War II and allowed them to continue much of their research in various environments here. The official reasoning is that they were attempting to keep these scientists out of the hands of other countries that might not have the world's best interest in mind. So this resulted in much of the medical advances the United States made at the time. Often these advances included components originally intended for weapons. Operation Paperclip was also directly responsible for the creation of the MK Ultra program. Now what's that? Now, I could have sworn I heard you say you didn't know what MK Ultra was. It was a massive set of psychological experiments conducted between the 50s and 70s, with tests being performed on often unknowing and non-consenting participants. I guess participant might be the wrong word, but think of places like college campuses where they were dosing the water with LSD, or the experiments that they were performing on soldiers. This program was a direct result of Operation Paperclip. By the way, they call it Project Paperclip in the game. It's great. It's not perfect. Now, the worst of these experiments would be performed in places like prisons and, yes, mental institutions. So how does this relate to teaching to history? Let me ask you something. Thinking about what we talked about with Wolfenstein, what if the Nazi mystics were correct and the supernatural could not only be conjured up on demand, but studied and weaponized? Outlast approaches this through the lens of lucid dreaming and some other mystical aspects of these studies. And using these ideas, one could potentially make a case for the end product looking something like... It could just be me, but he seems unfriendly. Yikes. Let's look at another example. This is Minerva's Den. It is the downloadable content for BioShock 2, or a kind of mini game. And in this game, you are at the bottom of the ocean in a city called Rapture that was built in the 1950s by this super rich man named Andrew Ryan. And Charles Milton Porter is this gifted mathematician who joined Alan Turing's code-breaking team that was working to expose the secrets of the Enigma machine during World War II. This is the cipher that the Nazis created, as a way of passing secret codes.
That first year in London working for Turing, I didn't see Pearl much. Spent all day and night in a government compound. enigma machine. Pearl got pretty fed up with me. I didn't pay her heed. And then one night, I'm out in that complex, and the blitz starts falling. Next morning, I came home to find nothing but ashes where I last saw her. Nothing but ashes.
This game does not get happier. Trust me, by the end of it, you're either going to be crying or just stunned, but you will remember it. Now, this is the point of me doing this lecture in this way, right? As somebody with ADHD and ASD diagnosed, sort of, in the 80s, I relied on a lot of educational games to help me through things like math, social studies, right? How did I learn about the westward expansion of the United States? That would be the Oregon Trail. And in order to learn algebra, there was a game called Math Blasters that I played well into my 20s, which was where you were basically this little cute cartoony guy who is trying to solve equations to get through a haunted house, okay? Like, when a child has alternative learning needs in the 80s and 90s, or had, they were often simply left behind in education. Additionally, there are neurological defects that can happen, causing, for instance, a condition called aphantasia, which is the inability to form mental pictures of any kind. And so what about people with auditory processing disorders? Lectures are the last thing they're going to learn from. Look at it this way. If you want to try to impress upon a student what a Bavarian village looks like, and that student is incapable of forming mental images, what do? You could show pictures. You could show videos to show how obedient the SS was, right? Or you could give them a controller and let them experience it for themselves. Now, not all games lean heavily into the fantastical aspects of World War II. Some of them want to be as historically accurate as possible, like Call of Duty. And do these games often feature tech that may be a little more advanced than what was actually available? Of course, but it's still a good way to learn certain aspects of studying these events. Notes, video recordings, these are all things that you can pick up during the game, and it puts together a narrative for you. And these cutscenes are really important for giving you this first bird's eye view, so to speak, of what this might have been like.
A struggle to preserve our civilization and to set free a suffering humanity. Our sons, pride of our nation, lead them straight and true.
When you're watching this and listening to this speech, it would be a rare kind of person that would not feel something. If you are an American citizen, say, whose family has enlisted in the military, for generations, you might feel this sense of pride or sorrow that it was necessary, or any of these things. Emotion ties into memory more than we think. The following is a quote from a research paper titled "The Influences of Emotion on Learning and Memory." You can find the link in the video description as soon as I figure out how to do that. Emotion has a substantial influence on the cognitive processes in humans, including perception, attention, learning, memory, reasoning, and problem solving. This study utilized things like very emotional films where memory recall was tested after viewing, and showed a positive correlation between emotion and general memories of the events. Historian Tor Olssen takes it a step further. Olssen actually takes a video game console to classes and intermixes it with general lectures, right? The students are then asked to, quote, craft a written blueprint for their own video game set in 1865 to 1920 period, where the dilemmas explored in the course would appear at center stage. And then Olssen goes on to explain that this not only attracted a bunch of non-history students to the course, but it increased engagement in these projects exponentially. And why is that? Because Olssen made it fun, right? positive emotions tie to positive gains in the ability for students to retain the information by getting them super excited about the prospect of building a world of their own. Now, let's go back to the idea of the occultism in Nazi Germany, okay? Of course, we're not going to see like this giant and ancient Emperor Otto turn into a monster that we have to fight in World War II. I hope. However, it is something that has fascinated people for decades, right? And this is evidenced by the fact that this single game series has been so enduringly popular. World War II in general is a fascinating study in human behavior. And I think the occult roots really give people something to chew on, so to speak. Now, even like casual readers of Nazi history will know that they hyper focused on this idea of there being like a biological, genetic, or even mystical origin of the superiority of the Aryan race, so to speak. Now, they were hyper focused on the Aryan blood in their ranks. And on October 4th in 1943, Heinrich Himmler gave a speech to a somewhat large group of SS officers in what is now Posen, Poland. I probably pronounced that wrong. I do apologize. He discussed multiple subjects, including this idea of pure Aryan blood and making sure that foreigners weren't diluting it. Nazi scientists had already engaged in this wide variety of human experimentation in search of Aryan origins. Now, in the article in my references, which is the Nazis' Archaeology that I pulled off of the website for the University of Nebraska, they discuss excavating Roman tunnels, essentially, looking for original, like, Proto-Germanic society. And so the heads of this organization said, "We have found the courage once more to admit the deeds of our ancestors. Their honor is our honor. The millennia separate us no longer." So what their orders was to essentially excavate until they reached the level of Roman times, and then go call in the Römisch-Germanische Commission, which were their main archaeological commission, and to look for evidence of the prehistoric Germans, right? So, what are we playing? This is the last game I'm going to show you, I promise. This game is Amnesia, the bunker, where you play a French soldier during World War I, hiding out in a French bunker that includes the excavation of Roman tunnels. Now, the bunker featured in this game is very reminiscent of something that they would have used as a resource if they could during World War I and World War II. And they would build in, whoever happened to find them would build in their own type of electricity and everything else that they might need while they are, down in these areas. And so it's pretty neat what they would come up with. Now, in this game, you have maps, a lighter, and a gas generator with very little fuel. Oh, and also there is absolutely a monster stalking you through this game. However, if I wanted to write a lecture regarding the what ifs of either World War I or World War II, leaning again into kind of that Nazi mysticism, I might start with this game. Now, the question you may be asking yourself right now is, what do these games even have to do with each other? And why would I tie them together when talking about history?
Son,
So,
you're special.
let's go a game at a time.
Do great things.
And while I do that, I am going to return to my favorite game, which is
They were
BioShock.
right.
Now, Wolfenstein gives you this wide view of a set of historical events on a macro scale. It shows how just one change, such as a new technology, could have vastly reshaped the outcome of World War II. Amnesia and Minerva's Den tie into this emotional experience lived by people in that time. In Amnesia, you don't even really need that monster to show how tense and claustrophobic it was being cooped up in a bunker like that while bombs are dropping all around you. These soldiers could not even step outside for fear of being shot. Okay. And this is the lived experience of millions of soldiers of worldwide, all countries, all wars, right? They all experience these really emotionally volatile situations. Minerva's Den features a rudimentary AI system that a grieving widower created after his wife was killed in the London Blitz. You know, they talk about Alan Turing, and they get you kind of excited about thinking about what these really brilliant mathematicians were doing. And it gets you also thinking about what the Germans were doing that you needed brilliant mathematicians for. Porter uses that to recreate the voice of his wife, only to find out that it's not going to help his grief. And Outlast shows how these programs and experiments have continued to echo into the future from World War II through Operation Paperclip and resulting programs such as MK Ultra. Outlast talks quite a bit about American society and how it was built, not Outlast, BioShock, which we are currently in, talks quite a bit about American society and how capitalism really took off after the war, right? I mean, you had your few not billionaires, you had millionaires. But for the most part, wages were still sort of equal. You could still have a family based on one income, that kind of thing. But when you're discussing programs such as MK Ultra, what people are not understanding is that when I say that our medical our medical technology has come from those programs, I mean very much Nazi scientists and continuations of these experiments that they were running in Germany at the time. Now you're going to notice a little bit of a glitch. We're suddenly back standing in front of the bathysphere because I realized I wanted to kind of wrap this up a little bit with one more piece of a cutscene sort of from the BioShock series. And I'll explain why once we're done listening to it. But it does tie really into how do games that seem completely not historical, not factual, not anything, how do those help people get interested in history, and how does it lead them in the right direction when they're wanting to learn about history? And this gentleman's story is really interesting and kind of ties into that.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, rapture can become your city as well.
So this is a very interesting kind of thought, that somebody can take what major events they're seeing in the world around them and capitalize on it in a way to create something like Rapture. Andrew Ryan's history is discussed in a novel called Rapture by author John Shirley. And it's a fun little bit of fantasy, sci-fi. But it discusses his history as having been born in Russia. And it kind of starts with this view of Andrew Ryan and his father, and Andrew Ryan is about 12 years old at the time, fleeing the Bolshevik revolution in Russia. Which just kind of goes to show the cascading effect that something like this can have, because they're going to talk about these real things and then tie it into, well, he lived through the Bolshevik Revolution and watched World War II and potentially capitalized on scientists brought out of Germany through Operation Paperclip, and he created this undersea city that he then founded based on the ideas of a completely free market, free capitalism, no police. But of course, you know, as soon as other people start doing well, it becomes a problem, right? And so, again, how did we get from World War II history to this? Well, essentially, the system that Andrew Ryan is using in his City of Rapture is based on ideals like American exceptionalism, and it is linked to, just the way that the world was changing after World War II. So I hope I have managed to impress upon you at this point how important video games, or games in general, as I said, I mentioned at the beginning, games like Risk, are how important they are into teaching students to be enthusiastic and curious about history. We think about historian Tor Olssen taking video games to classes, right, to actually show students what it is and having them create a video game based on what they've learned. And when you foster that kind of curiosity, this is the end result. You get people who take these historical events, think about the what ifs. What if a fantastic mathematician was able to create an underwater city, right? You know, it just goes on, and it's that cascading effect, like I said. And hopefully it will also have encouraged you to want to try to play some video games, maybe play through that Call of Duty game and see how it compares to the actual history of World War II. And that is an assignment that I would give to somebody. I would say, I want you to pick a video game, and I want you to outline to me how it gives examples of the idea of contingency and how history is conditional. And what does it look like in the video game versus what was the reality versus what's realistic when you are kind of trying to use the patterns of history to sort of estimate what's going to continue to happen, right? So let's look at reality. Let's like what actually happened in history, what they've done here, and what is the realistic thing kind of in between those two ideas. I hope that this has been educational. I hope it's been fun. And I hope that it has given you kind of an insight, not just into how they can be used for history, but what kind of people really could utilize them. Like I said, I am on the spectrum, and I know that the more we dig into alternative methods of learning, the better life gets for everybody who may be experiencing those specific kinds of learning disabilities. Thank you for watching, and I hope it was educational.